Welcome to the Federal Aviation Administration's Avoiding Spatial Disorientation video. This video is a product of the FAA's Safer Skies agenda, a renewed commitment between FAA and industry to develop educational programs designed to reduce the number of aviation accidents.
Hi, I'm Sean Elliott, the President of the National Association of Flight Instructors. One of the most important missions of our organization is safety. Most flight instructors define safety as minimizing risk through quality training and education. The members of the IAC, or International Aerobatics Club, share this definition. The IAC is a competitive aerobatics organization, but more importantly, its focus on safety affects all types of pilots flying all types of aircraft. The IAC has enjoyed an outstanding safety record over its 30-plus years of aerobatic competition. It's because of this expertise, along with the educational focus of NAFI, that the FAA has commissioned the IAC to develop the program you're about to see. I'm certain you'll find the program both informational and educational, but most importantly, I'm certain you'll find it of value in making you a safer pilot.
Mike Goulian can boast such accomplishments as being named U.S. Unlimited National Champion, being a three-time member of the U.S. National Aerobatic Team, and securing multiple medals at the World Aerobatic Championships. Goulian is also a certified flight instructor, specializing in aerobatic instruction. In his spare time, he amazes crowds with spectacular airshow performances.
The FAA has identified 6 categories into which the large majority of general aviation accidents can be classified. Number 2 on that list is loss of control. In recent years, a number of high-profile accidents has focused renewed attention on the role of spatial disorientation in loss of control accidents. In this program, we'll take a closer look at 3 classic spatial disorientation scenarios. All 3 are accident scenarios that continue to get pilots into trouble, and often with deadly results. We'll also discuss strategies to help you recognize and avoid situations that can lead to spatial disorientation. The first of the classic spatial disorientation scenarios occurs when a non-instrument-rated pilot transitions from visual meteorological conditions into instrument meteorological conditions. Despite the admonition, VFR not recommended, during the weather briefing, the pilot confidently presses ahead on the daytime cross-country flight. But the weather begins to worsen. Before the pilot realizes it, visual contact with the ground is lost. The airplane has entered IMC. The pilot tries to focus on the instruments, but those few hours under the hood during primary training were a long time ago, and what the instruments show is completely different from what the pilot feels. Airspeed is increasing, the altimeter is unwinding, the symbolic airplane is leaning to one side. The instruments indicate the start of a spiral. Sensing only the descent, the pilot reacts by pulling back even harder on the yoke. But things just get worse. The pilot's mind races as the gravity of the situation sinks in. The second scenario also involves a non-instrument-rated pilot, this time on a night flight over water or over a sparsely populated area. It's a dark, moonless night with little contrast between the sky above and the ground below. It's hard to tell where the stars end and the scattered points of light from the ground begin. To the pilot, it looks and feels like the airplane is flying wings level, maybe even in a slight climb. The instruments, however, show the airplane banked to the left and starting to descend. Reacting to the instruments, the pilot snaps the ailerons to the right in an attempt to level the wings. The instruments indicate the pilot is doing the right thing, but the pilot experiences the strong sensation that the airplane is actually overbanking to the right. Ignoring the instruments now, the pilot instinctively reverses the aileron input. The airplane rolls back to the left. At the same time, the ambient noise level increases as the airplane starts spiraling earthward. Confused by the conflicting information between what the pilot is sensing and what the instruments are showing, the pilot freezes on the controls. The last of the spatial disorientation scenarios involves an instrument-rated pilot on an instrument flight plan in IMC conditions. The flight seems to be going well when air traffic control notifies the pilot that the airplane is deviating from its assigned heading and altitude. Surprised by this radio call, the pilot places renewed focus on the attitude indicator and directional gyro, both mounted in the center of the instrument panel. According to these instruments, the airplane is still wings level and on heading. All the supporting instruments, however, indicate otherwise. And continually missed in the pilot's instrument scan is the vacuum pressure gauge, which has read 0 for a while. ATC again warns the pilot about heading and altitude. The pilot now fixates exclusively on the slowly failing attitude indicator and directional gyro. Nothing else seems to matter. These accident scenarios share a number of common traits. First, warning signs of potential trouble when unheeded by each pilot. Second, as the scenarios unfolded, conflicting sensory information and instrument indications led to confusion in the cockpit. And third, situational awareness eventually collapsed to tunnel vision, rendering each pilot unable to identify and cope with the developing unusual attitude. To understand the underlying causes of spatial disorientation accidents, we've enlisted the help of 3 guest experts. First, we'll talk with former space shuttle astronaut, naval aviator, and sport airplane enthusiast Robert Hood Gibson, and his wife, former astronaut Dr. M. Ria Seddon.
The overwhelming majority of spatial disorientation accidents result from overconfidence, which then leads to poor decision-making on the part of the pilot. This is particularly true in cases involving flight from VFR conditions into instrument conditions. And the majority of these spatial disorientation accidents result in a fatality. When it comes to critical flight decisions, pilots should ask themselves the following questions. Am I making this decision based on all the available objective information? And am I allowing a hazardous attitude to influence my decision? If the answer is yes to that second question, figure out the attitude that's in play and eliminate that from the decision-making process. Pilots should always try to err on the side of caution. The focus of instrument training, both in the Navy as well as at NASA, was always on the fact that you must rely on your aircraft instruments. You cannot trust your senses at all in these kinds of situations. And there were a great many places, such as out over the middle of the ocean at night around the aircraft carrier, where there was nothing else out there to help you. Nothing lighted, no ground reference, nothing that would help you other than your aircraft instruments. So you must rely on those.
Under certain conditions of flight, our human senses can betray us. Our human sensory systems have limits that all pilots need to understand. Of all our senses, we rely primarily on our sense of sight for information.
And I think you learn that when your eyes are not giving you all of the information that you need, you become dependent more on other sensors in the body. And of course, pilots all fly by the seat of their pants, which sort of means that you get a sensation from your nerves and your muscles and your skin about where the pressures are coming from or where gravity is acting upon you, and you become sensitive to that fact and you begin to listen to that a little bit more. Of course, the gravity sensing organs in the body, the ones that are really specialists in sensing gravity, are in the inner ear.
The most dangerous illusions contributing to spatial disorientation are related to our motion sensing system.
There's a sensation called the leans that most pilots become aware of, and the problem is frequently you're going along level and you go into a bank, and it's very difficult for the inner ear to sense a very slight bank of, say, 2 degrees or less, and the otoliths may pick it up or may not, and the little hair cells bend with that acceleration, But then after you've been in that bank for a while, the otoliths tend to become less responsive and sort of go back to a neutral position. So you can be in a slight bank and feel that you're really level, and you may get into a bank to the point where you feel like you need to come back up to a level, but it feels like you're going the other way. There's also a condition called entering a graveyard spiral. Sometimes pilots can't sense the fact that they're in a very slow roll rate, and they may progress into a descent, and they can really only sense the fact that they're descending and tend to pull up, and really what they're doing is they're rolling, and they are not sensing that component of the acceleration, and that frequently can lead to something called a graveyard spiral, in which they can spiral into the ground because the sensation is fooling them. Vertigo is another thing that pilots worry about, and should. Often when your head is in the cockpit and you are scanning instruments or looking at maps and make a rapid head movement, the fluid in the inner ear can begin to move, and because of the confusing situation, you can develop vertigo, meaning dizziness. And there's a problem with that, because you may become dependent on what your inner ear is telling you, and really it's sending very confusing signals. And so when you get into a situation like vertigo, it's very difficult to ignore the sensation of that you're spinning or that things are moving rapidly, but it's really only taking place inside your inner ear. It's not happening with the airplane.
Over the years, aviation safety has published countless articles dealing with spatial disorientation resulting from vacuum system failures. Vacuum system failure is the most common precursor to spatial disorientation accidents involving instrument-rated pilots flying in IMC. Ken Eibold is the director of Aviation Safety magazine.
Most airplanes that are flown seriously for IFR do have some kind of a backup system. I think that the best backup system is to have an electrically powered attitude indicator that is mounted somewhere on the panel close to your primary attitude indicator to use as a backup. Now, what some pilots do is they install the electrically driven backup attitude indicator over on the co-pilot side as an instrument over there, which takes it out of the scan, which makes it very difficult to use in the event of an emergency. And then in addition to that, if the directional gyro fails, I think that using GPS tracking is a perfectly acceptable substitute for the directional gyro.
The statistics are sobering. 9 out of 10 spatial disorientation accidents are fatal. Recognizing the warning signs and avoiding the scenarios that lead to spatial disorientation are key to preventing the otherwise fatal accidents. Realize, too, that a non-instrument-rated pilot flirting with instrument meteorological conditions, day or night, runs the greatest risk of experiencing spatial disorientation en route to a fatal accident. And relying on a mixture of contact flying with instrument flying when external visual cues are obscured or ambiguous, such as when trying to scud run, or flying between cloud layers, or flying at night, isn't a wise strategy either. One survey revealed that a third of the pilots who attempted flight by combining visual and instrument flying became confused in the process. In fact, after losing contact with visual references, even an instrument-qualified pilot can take as long as 30 seconds to transition fully to the instrument environment. In other words, if you haven't established control of the airplane using instruments before entering either marginal VMC or IMC, chances are it may already be too late. The leading cause of spatial disorientation accidents is the pilot. More precisely, poor decisions made by pilots unqualified and unprepared to tangle with marginal VMC or IMC or night flying. Don't push your limits or your luck. Evaluate pre-flight weather briefings logically, not emotionally. Get frequent weather updates en route and be alert for deteriorating weather. Formulate a backup plan before the flight and be ready to implement that plan before the situation gets out of hand. If you fly on instruments routinely, stay proficient in recoveries from unusual attitudes and partial panel techniques, and be alert for vacuum pump failures. Consider installing a backup to the vacuum system or an autopilot, or at least carrying a handheld GPS just in case. If the vacuum system fails, transition to partial panel, keeping the wings level by referencing the electric turn coordinator. If possible, cover up the inoperative instruments to avoid any confusion. Then declare an emergency. And be ready to fight off the illusions and false sensations associated with spatial disorientation. Scan, trust, and react smoothly to those instruments that are giving you accurate information about your flight condition. Let's revisit our spatial disorientation scenarios, paying close attention now to the various warning signs. The forecast calls for deteriorating weather en route. The briefer is unequivocal, VFR not recommended. The pilot is not instrument rated, yet is confident based on handling similar situations just fine in the past. The weather worsens, the pilot presses on, believing nothing bad will happen. The airplane enters IMC, the pilot tries to transition to instruments. But the airspeed is already on the rise as the altimeter unwinds. The attitude indicator, directional gyro, and symbolic airplane all show the airplane in a turn. The pilot only senses the descent and pulls harder on the elevator. The graveyard spiral tightens. It's a moonless night with ambiguous ambient lighting conditions. The pilot is non-instrument rated and attempts to mix contact flying with instrument flying. Visually, it appears the airplane is wings level, perhaps climbing slightly. The instruments indicate the start of a left descending turn. The pilot overreacts to the instruments with a rapid roll to the right. The resulting fluid movement in the pilot's semicircular canals triggers the leans. Reacting to the sensation of overbanking, the pilot returns the airplane to the attitude that feels correct. The cockpit noise level increases as the graveyard spiral gathers momentum. The pilot is instrument rated and is flying in IMC. The vacuum pump fails, the vacuum gauge drops to 0. But the pilot's instrument scan has progressively gotten lazier, fixating more and more on the attitude indicator and directional gyro. The supporting instruments show the airplane beginning a slow, descending turn. The pilot senses nothing. ATC warns of altitude and heading deviations. Confused by the conflicting information displayed by the instruments, the pilot focuses on the attitude indicator and directional gyro. ATC issues another warning as the descent continues. Being the pilot in command is not a passive process. Safety of flight is your responsibility and demands your active and continuous participation. Remember that the no-go option is always available for every planned flight. So too is the option to turn around before encountering conditions that are beyond your capabilities. As the pilot in command, you can also elect to terminate a flight and perform a precautionary off-airport landing while you still have control over the airplane. This is far more preferable to pressing on, encountering IMC, becoming disoriented, and ending up as another fatal accident statistic. Develop your own set of personal minimums as well, which should include the following items. Avoid flying when the visibility is less than 3 miles unless you're flying on an instrument flight plan. Also, fly on instruments at night or whenever there's limited visibility. Stay night current, and don't rely on the latest GPS and moving map technology to get you out of trouble. You can avoid spatial disorientation by always flying within your capabilities, and when flying on instruments, be sure to make frequent instrument cross-checks. If you do experience spatial disorientation, take the following immediate actions. Don't panic. Minimize your head movements. Ignore what your body is telling you. Keep your head in the cockpit and scan the flight instruments. Regain control, as the military suggests, by making the instruments read-write. For example, if the instruments indicate a spiral dive, reduce power, smoothly shallow the bank, then smoothly reverse the increasing airspeed and unwinding altimeter trends until the airplane is stabilized and in level flight. Once you've regained control of the situation, advise ATC and declare an emergency. Focus all of your attention on flying the aircraft and use ATC to help you navigate to the nearest practical airport. Be sure to perform clearing turns before and while practicing any airborne training exercises. And when appropriate, be sure to take along a qualified safety pilot or flight instructor. Also, as the pilot in command, adhere strictly to the operating limitations listed in your airplane's flight manual and posted on cockpit placards.
An excellent way to experience sensory illusions safely is in one of the FAA's virtual reality spatial disorientation demonstrations. These and similar training devices can be found in Oklahoma City, as well as FAA exhibits during the annual EAA Sun and Fun and AirVenture fly-ins, and other major air shows across the U.S. Stop by and give one of these devices a try. You'll come away from the experience with renewed respect for the ease with which we can become disoriented.
If you routinely fly in the instrument environment, recurrent training in instrument flying techniques and procedures can be done using any number of ground-based simulators or personal computer flight simulation programs. Many of these also allow simulation of a variety of instrument failures and other emergencies. In addition to ground-based simulations to improve your instrument scan and troubleshooting techniques, be sure to include recoveries from unusual attitudes while under the hood in an airplane. Doing this will add an important element of realism to your recurrent training regimen, including introducing all of the physiological sensations that can trigger spatial disorientation.
No matter how much flight time you have, don't be embarrassed if you're uncomfortable with the prospect of encountering an unusual attitude, or if your instrument flying skills aren't as sharp as they could be. Dual instruction can help. And get some dual if you don't feel competent to practice the exercises we've recommended by yourself.
Additional instruction as part of your next flight review, instrument competency check, or the FAA's Wings program can go a long way toward turning anxiety about spatial disorientation into renewed confidence and competence during critical flight operations. Additional training can improve your situational awareness as well. In fact, obtaining an instrument rating is one of the best ways to address loss of control due to spatial disorientation. That and continually striving to make rational go, no-go decisions, always being alert for hazardous mental attitudes that may cloud your judgment, and always give yourself an out, an alternative course of action you'll take if the weather turns bad. Two resources readily available to help you locate instructors and flight schools capable of safely exploring an airplane's envelope with you are the National Association of Flight Instructors and the International Aerobatic Club. Both are divisions of the Experimental Aircraft Association. NAFI maintains a list of certificated and master flight instructors who are dedicated to providing professional flight training services. And the IAC annually publishes a directory of aerobatic schools. The IAC also offers a complete line of books and videos specifically addressing all-attitude flight.
Make use of these and other resources. Never stop being a student. Strive to learn all you can about the flight environment. Stay current, not only with the exercises we've described, but also with instrument flying. Know the limits of your airplane, of your skills, and of your human physiology. Exercise good judgment and remain situationally aware, especially when the weather is changing for the worse. Get some additional dual once in a while and learn to recognize the warning signs preceding a loss of control.
After viewing this program, perhaps you have gained valuable insights that will make you a better and safer pilot. Don't stop there. Take the next step. For information on expanding your flight envelope as a pilot, consider joining the IAC. IAC's website can be found at iac.org. If you're a certified flight instructor and would like to expand your abilities as a quality educator, consider joining NAFI. NAFI's website can be found at nafinet.org. In addition to IAC's and NAFI's areas of expertise, the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, is a valuable resource for all pilots concerned with safer flying and who wish to enhance their skills. If you'd like to find out more about the FAA's Aviation Safety Program, contact your local safety program manager at your local Flight Standards District office. Another readily available resource is the FAA's website at faa.gov. The Aviation Safety page and the Safer Skies Agenda section in particular contain a wealth of knowledge. Always from the right seat, this is Sean Elliott saying thank you for your interest in safety.
This video was the result of the FAA's desire to tap into the practical knowledge of pilots routinely operating in this area of the flight envelope. To accomplish this, the FAA teamed up with the International Aerobatic Club and the National Association of Flight Instructors, both subsidiaries of the Experimental Aircraft Association, to discuss their views on accident scenarios that have plagued general and military aviation since the earliest days of powered flight.